This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you. Today we are going to be having a big discussion on misinformation and disinformation, as well as some foreign influence in current events. For that, I have Marcus Kolga here. He is a senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, as well as a documentary filmmaker, journalist, human rights activist, and a leading Canadian analyst of foreign disinformation and influence operations. Marcus founded disinfowatch.org in 2020 to monitor and analyze foreign disinformation targeting Canada. DisinfoWatch's work in monitoring and analyzing foreign information and influence operations has been featured in a wide range of national and international media. In March of 2022, he was one of the first Canadians named to the Kremlin's sanctions blacklist and has been a regular target of well-documented Russian transnational repression since 2019. And because he wasn't done there, in December of 2023, Marcus was named to the Chinese government sanctions, making him one of only 3 Canadians to be sanctioned by both Russia and China. So welcome, Marcus.
Thanks for having me on, Nathan.
I was going to start with talking about you and just a bit of your background, but first I want to ask, you're one of only 3 people on both Russia and China's lists. Are you guys like a special club now? Do you got like some initiation in there?
It's a good idea. We should make up some hats or T-shirts or something like that.
Yeah, you got to get a ring or something. You know what? Let's start with just talking a bit about you, your background. How do you find yourself in this space? Because I don't think anyone I know has ever said they want to grow up and be a disinfo expert. So how did you get into all this?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's pretty niche, and there's just so much going on in terms of foreign interference, transnational oppression, fighting against human rights abuses that I've been doing. That you don't sit down and sort of reflect on how exactly one does get into this sort of a position. I put a lot of it down to my background, my ethnic heritage. So my parents came to Canada in the arms of their parents, and in the arms of my grandparents in 1944. They were born in Estonia, and during the Second World War, and in 1944, the Soviets, Russian Soviets, came in and reoccupied Estonia, and my grandparents weren't interested in seeing a sort of a rerun of that movie that they saw already in 1941. At that point, during this first Soviet occupation, my grandfather was picked up by the KGB and sent to the Soviet Gulag, from which he actually escaped in 1942. But friends and family were terrorized, violently repressed. I had great uncles and aunts who were arrested, tortured, and murdered. And so in September of 44, they left Estonia, and so I grew up very much with this understanding of what it means to lose one's freedom, one's home, democracy. And so, I think I've always had this sort of oversized sense of justice and the need to protect democracy and freedom. And so that sort of informed my career, starting in university, moving into journalism in the late 1990s, documentary filmmaking and such. But this sort of really active phase of the work that I'm involved in right now started around 2007, when Estonia was targeted by Moscow with a campaign to try and destabilize it. This was all done using the pretext of, or the justification was, the Estonian government's relocation of a Soviet World War II monument from the center of Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, to a war cemetery. And so the Russian embassy in Tallinn used that to foment ethnic violence in the capital. Things looked really grim for a few days. Much of the downtown core was smashed up. There was quite a bit of violence. There was even, I think, one protester was killed. And at that point, Russia engaged in the first ever state-sponsored cyber attacks against Estonia, a massive DDoS attack that basically took out all of the government infrastructure, media, banking sectors. And after that, Russia deployed a massive disinformation campaign against, well, just before that and after that, a massive disinformation campaign targeting Estonia, basically manipulating its history, denying the occupation of Estonia, denying the repressions and deportations that happened there. And not just in Estonia, but Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine as well. Much of many of the nations, or actually all the nations that were held captive by the Soviets during the Cold War. And so I became quite active then. I dedicated myself to, first of all, trying to do all that I can to challenge those Russian narratives, because we saw an intensification of them then, and that was really the start of the modern phase of Russia's information warfare against the West. I also committed myself to defending human rights as much as possible, working with the Russian opposition, people like Boris Nemtsov, who, of course, was brutally assassinated in 2015 just in front of the Kremlin, my friend Vladimir Kara-Murza, Garry Kasparov, and many others who were bravely fighting Putin's authoritarianism inside Russia. And I also started working with a gentleman named Bill Browder, who some of your listeners may recognize. Bill is the leader of the global Magnitsky campaign. And so with Bill, along with former Justice Minister Erwin Kotler, I led the Canadian campaign and campaigns in Estonia, Latvia, and other places to adopt Magnitsky sanctions to target Russian human rights abusers and corrupt officials with sanctions in the West, to hold them to account. And that's sort of where it all started, and this is where I've ended up.
Okay. You know what? So one of the points you make in there, and this is speaking to prior guests, I haven't had too many people speak on Russia on the show, but certainly China has been a big topic on here, and the manipulation of history. So that's a part of Scott McGregor's book, The Mosaic Effect. We had Ivy Lee, who's a contributor to that book. She spoke about some of the events that she's been to where she sees like glaring holes when they go to these events that are, I guess, to kind of get people to like China or cozy up to it a bit. They take out, they leave out certain sections of history. So it's just kind of interesting, like right from the ground level all the way through these disinformation campaigns, the amount of effort that is out there to actually manipulate some of the information. I do want to ask, before we get right into all that stuff, though, about the sanctions. I'm wondering, because there's not too many people on these lists, so I take the opportunity to ask about it. How do you? Well, maybe we'll start with, what did you do to get on one of those lists, and then how do you find out that you're even on a list, and what does it mean? Like, does it just mean you can't go on vacations there anymore? Is there more to it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the two different lists, China and Russia, it's quite different. So on the Russian side of things, I think, I sort of mentioned the work that I've been doing on Russia, whether it's, fighting human rights, calling out the regime, working with, basically exiled Russian opposition leaders. All of that, I mean, has made me a pretty significant target of the Kremlin. And so being added to their list was sort of, I mean, it was sort of amusing, I guess. It was just, I found out about it. It was just about 2 or 3 weeks into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. March 2022, I was in Ottawa. I was invited to a virtual session of Parliament where President Zelensky was addressing parliamentarians.
Okay.
And so the Prime Minister's office sent an invitation for me to attend that. So I drove to Ottawa for that event. And I guess the Kremlin made the announcement about the sanctions during Zelensky's speech, because as I left Parliament, I got a text message from the then Lithuanian ambassador to Canada, Darius Kusevich, who basically said, "Congratulations, you've made the list." And I said, "What list?" And he said the Russians, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, just published the list, and so that came out. But At this point, there are thousands of Canadians on that list. And quite frankly, the Russians are so disorganized and clumsy that I don't think that they'll ever be able to do anything with that list. It's purely symbolic. The bigger problem for me on the Russian side of things in terms of transnational repression has been pretty much a decades-long campaign against me. So Russian state media regularly publishes articles that try to defame me. Komsomolskaya Pravda, which is probably the largest tabloid in Russia, very much Kremlin-aligned. It also regularly publishes articles about me. In fact, I think it was through 2 or 3 years ago that they published an article and started up a change.org campaign to try and get the Canadian government to strip me of my citizenship, even though I'm born here. So,
Okay.
and it was a bit silly. But there's some more sinister sort of campaigns that I've endured as well. There was about a 2-year period where I was getting regular death threats. One of which was investigated by law enforcement just north of Toronto. They actually found the perpetrator and they offered to charge him, but I declined to press charges because I knew that the Russian embassy would make a martyr out of him. So they let him go with a warning. But thanks to that intervention, that sort of the threats stopped. But that's probably the worst of it from Russia. On the China side of things, I've also been quite critical of China. I've regularly written about China, especially its genocide against the Uyghurs in East Turkestan. And I've also been tried to do as much as I can to support Uyghur activist communities here in Canada. I suspect it's because of that support that I was included in the list of 20 Canadians who were named to the Chinese list in December. And that one's a bit more complicated because China is quite sophisticated and they are determined to silence the critics of the regime. And so the group of us, especially the Uyghur activists, have had pretty regular meetings with Global Affairs to discuss the implications of this. Travel is becoming more complicated for me now because I have to make sure that the nations or the countries that I do travel to don't have extradition treaties with China, because you never know. I mean, there's no rule of law in China. If they decide to charge me and sentence me, they can do that within like 24 hours, right? And if that's the case, they can cause a real nuisance for me in terms of travel, like potential Interpol red notices, and that's for everyone on that sanctions list. So that's a problem. Physical security is also a problem. I mean, I've got about 5 cameras now installed around my house, for peace of mind, because it's not just me as the target who is affected by this; it's my entire family.
Yeah.
And that's really challenging. And that's one of the greatest challenges in all of this is having those discussions with your family, letting them know, here's the number you're supposed to call. If you see something suspicious while you're at university, when you're at the mall, you have to let me know. And if you're feeling threatened, here's the number that you need to call. And it's an awkward conversation to have. Most people don't have that. And then the other problem with the Chinese sanctions list is that it also does impact family members. So the Chinese legislation on sanctions basically says that any family member can also be targeted, or anyone they work with. So in the future, my kids could have problems if they're looking for work. If potential employers understand that their father is on the sanctions list and that they may be impacted, they may have problems finding work. Who knows what else? And they may also have problems with their travel. So, it's sort of fun to talk about it. It's certainly a badge of honor to have this distinction from both of those regimes, but at the same time, it does make life a little bit more complicated.
Speaking from someone who's in law enforcement, and I work with informants, and I work in the war crime realm of things. I mean, you're saying the stuff that speaks right to what I've been involved with, like having those conversations with your family, making sure that they know, hey, if someone approaches us when we're out, I don't know you, or you go the other way or something, right? Like there's a lot of different things that you have to take care of and be a little bit more vigilant than the average person. I won't get into all my gripes about self-defense laws in Canada because I think we're not doing ourselves a lot of favors, but okay, well, yeah, you know what? And I guess even if you're traveling, that's a good thing to note that if you go into a country that's friendly with one of them, that could be a serious concern for you. I guess like you could be in the middle of a flight and it has to divert for whatever reason. You're like, no, 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 no. We're not going to this country. Like I'm not getting off this plane or we're not landing there.
Yeah.
Like that's something you have to worry about. So wow. Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, because we have seen authoritarians do this in the past. I think it was just, was it in 2021, 2022, a Belarusian journalist, Roman Protasevich, he was flying from, I think it was Athens to Vilnius, where he was living in exile. The flight, it was a Ryanair flight. It happened to transit Belarusian airspace. The Belarusians knew they had, because they're transiting, they had the passenger manifest, and they ordered the plane to land in Minsk. And they grabbed him, Roman, off the aircraft, beat the living daylights out of him for 2 days, and then he made a public confession. And so, yeah, I mean, transiting the airspace of either Russia, China, or other, countries that are aligned with them is a concern. So now if I am flying to, for instance, Taipei in the next little while, I'll make sure that whichever airline I'm taking does not transit any of those airspaces or any other country that I'm flying to. I'm going to make sure that that airline doesn't enter Russian or Chinese airspace.
Okay.
It's a pain.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, certainly. Okay, well, we'll move on to the misinfo, disinfo stuff we were going to get into here because I want to make sure I get you out of here on time. One of the things that has come up, and we were kind of saying this before we started the recording, but I want to talk a bit about at the ground level with the average Canadian. And I said I saw this in law enforcement with people on the street. Like it's just, I don't think at the ground level people really understand the scope and the complexity to the misinformation, disinformation campaigns that are out there. People are very set in their views. They read one or two news sources and that's their view. Can you kind of give us an idea of just how big these operations are? I was referencing one of the videos that MLI had put out recently where you're saying there was like 500, I don't know what it was, attempts an hour by this Pravda group.
Yeah.
And that's just one group we were saying. So there's hundreds, if not thousands of those. So you frame the context of this, how big it is.
Yeah, I can try because it really is. It's huge, and I don't think that most average Canadians. I don't think our government understands really the scope of it because we haven't done enough to challenge it. But the first thing I would say is that just in terms of Russian information influence operations, they are currently spending an average of about $1.6 billion US a year on trying to deceive us, to manipulate public opinion in the West, and to influence and the ultimate goal is to influence policymaking. So they are really spending a ton of money on these operations. They have vast resources working in this space, whether it's intelligence agents inside of Russia, agents working in the Western world, as well as a vast, huge network of assets that are supporting this work. And it's not anything that's new. What Canadians need to also recognize is that the Russians have been at this for about 90 years.
Okay.
We have loads of evidence of this. Back in 1945, there was a Russian intelligence officer working at the Russian embassy, Soviet embassy at the time in Ottawa, who basically defected with a trove of documents tucked underneath his shirt. And those documents included evidence of a vast network in Canada. At least 24 people were arrested, working in media, including a sitting MP who were basically on Russia's payroll in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And so this work continued throughout the Cold War, and it's continuing today. Now they're aided by technology, and as you mentioned, this Pravda group, for example, that's a news group that was set up around the time of COVID, just before COVID. It's just like a a vast network of websites that basically aggregate news from other Russian-aligned sites. And those operations, I mean, the rate that they're posting information to those platforms, it's estimated to be somewhere around 500 to 600 articles per hour. Now, the thing about that operation is that most people won't go to these sites. There's in fact a Pravda site that targets Canada specifically, for example, and Canadian issues. But the real purpose of that, and this speaks to the sophistication of these operations, those websites, and there are hundreds of them, are then links are fed into Wikipedia and other platforms to try and game large language models, AI, to deceive them and manipulate the results that they produce. So the key is to have these AI models then go into Wikipedia, learn from these Pravda sites, and the Pravda sites then become trusted sources for the AI models.
Really?
And through that, then the results. So if you ask, did for example, and this is off the top of my head, you might ask ChatGPT, for example, did Russia start the current war with Ukraine? AI might go through various different websites, but it'll include the Pravda websites, and that will then influence the response. And there's a clear manipulation of truth happening here. So that's the level of sophistication. There's $1.6 billion that are being spent on this annually. China spends at least that, if not more, on similar operations. Their operations are a little bit different. You probably know, and your listeners probably know, that their English language disinformation campaigns in terms of media are just it's just awful. I mean, when you compare them to Russia, I mean, if you go to a site like Global Times, I was just analyzing a piece.
They just didn't hit the spell and grammar check. If they would just do
like
that,
it's nuts. Well, and they need to cut out the Xi sort of Communist Party speak. I mean, it's all, the articles are all like proclamations about the greatness of China. And it's like, it's totally ineffective. But they are really effective where they're really, outshine the Russians is on their sort of ground game in terms of influencing, controlling their own diaspora communities, influencing them, intimidating them, coercing them to act, to support China's objectives. And of course, as we saw in the 2021 election, we're seeing it now, efforts to manipulate individual, election campaigns in specific ridings and such. And so, we're seeing this happen right now here in Canada. We know that in Markham, Unionville, a conservative nomination candidate, Joe Tay, was targeted with these sorts of operations. He, at the same time as I was added to the Chinese sanctions list, Joe was had a $1 million Hong Kong $1 million bounty placed on his head in efforts to sort of push him out of that race. So it's happening as we speak, and that's where China really is very effective.
Do you think, is it the government's job to combat this specifically? Is it them solely who is responsible to kind of go after this? Because when I look at some of the stuff that comes out, there's a lot of discussion, say, on like controlling speech. Hate speech is a big one.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, that can get to be a real fine line. And this has come from the guy that they're going to push the legislation down and expect to enforce it. Luckily, we have discretion on certain things, but it's interesting to see. And you're like, well, that doesn't sound like a good solution. But I think outside of the government, we have a lot of other places that we should be looking to get some help from. Obviously, tech, you mentioned AI. We need someone working on the other side of it to make sure we have proper information. And when I say proper, that's not like, when I say proper, I mean the good with the bad, right? We should have full disclosure on history. So yeah, all the bad things that happened here and all the good, but it's that transparency, I think, that will lend to us being able to combat a lot of this disinformation, because that transparency builds trust. People go to the right sources then. One of the things that I was thinking of was both in the education system and media. So the education system, I think we have to start there and have like a cultural change. We have to start getting people to think about this a little bit more, and whether that's elementary school or junior high, but there's got to be more built in where we can educate people from an earlier age. Hey, this is how our government works and our way of life. And here's these other ways that people do things and they try to influence us. I think those conversations can be had at a real basic level. And then in media, being in law enforcement, I see what media reports on certain events and even ones that I've been at. And I'm like, wow, they're getting that real wrong over there. Do you think even in that space, like, as a solution, we have CBC, CTV are kind of our two big ones. Like, is there more room for more in the mainstream media space? So I'm just looking for some different solutions that you think that would help combat the misinfo, disinfo.
Yeah, Nathan, I mean, all of those are accurate and great ideas. I completely agree with all of it. Going to the first part of your question about government's role, you're right. I mean, it's not really government's role to start policing speech, especially when we're talking about domestic information that's being moved around. I mean, every Canadian, including my, wacky uncle, he's allowed to believe that the world is flat. Yeah. Not that he does, but anyone is allowed to believe that. They're allowed to try to advance those views in Canada as Canadians, and this is something that we need to protect that right. That said, I mean, that does not mean that we cannot scrutinize those views and ideas, and that's the key here, right? There is freedom of expression, but then we also have a responsibility to scrutinize some of those strange ideas.
That's the critical thinking part that I think a lot of people are missing when we're just going based on headlines and the clickbait, right? Everyone starts screaming at each other. Where's the debate? Where's the critical thinking of these things?
Yeah, and so government's role in all of this is, possibly to convene, civil society actors, people like you and I, media as well, academia, to sort of try to figure out a strategy to protect against this. Where government definitely has a role is when foreign governments weaponize information against us. And so the placement of sanctions, accountability, transparency of anyone who is collaborating with foreign regimes to try to undermine our democracy. If there is some criminality involved, as we have seen in the past, then the government does have a role to hold those individuals to account and prosecute them wherever possible, and to push back against foreign regimes. So government definitely has a role there. In terms of education, I completely agree with you. I mean, we should be looking to the Finnish model. The Finns have been doing this very well. What they do, it's not like, and I think that the Canadian high schools, even elementary schools, they might have, a 1 hour lesson every year about how to navigate social media or maybe on cyber related issues, which is great. But, if I think back to my own childhood, like you get this information and then like it's gone the next day, because something else comes at you. But the way the Finns do this is they actually bake media literacy, cyber security into right into the curriculum. So this is from kindergarten to high school. Every single course has this built into it. So you might be taking a course on statistics, and the teacher will talk about how statistics can be manipulated by foreign actors and others. History, even science, all of those courses have an element of media literacy built into them. And through that, I mean, Finland has quite rapidly over the past decade become one of the most resilient societies in the Western world against foreign disinformation. And so we should be looking to a model like that. The problem that we have here in Canada is that we're a federation, and you have to go to every single province and convince the local government to do this. This isn't a federal issue. So that's I think, the biggest challenge, quite frankly, that we face here in Canada on doing that. But we need to certainly improve our media literacy. And quite frankly, I mean, people always ask me, what's the silver bullet? How do we fix the current information environment to pull back those that have sort of fallen down the rabbit holes? And my response is like, we can't, there is no silver bullet. When you have these other governments, these foreign governments spending that much money, what we need to think about is future generations, inoculating them, and making sure that they don't fall into the same rabbit holes. And that's, again, looking at sort of the Finnish model and figuring out how we can inoculate them and protect them.
You know what? You bring up a good point there about like the silver bullet. And I think that's what a lot of people get stuck on. They think issues are so very just black and white. I just need the one solution. Tell me what to do and I'll fix it. But it's not really a case of that. This is a conversation I had on a prior podcast with Scott McGregor, Cynthia Alcon. She teaches a hybrid warfare course within a law program down at Texas A&M, and just how to frame problems as complicated versus complex. And I thought it was a brilliant, podcast and discussion because we were having it. But it was the topic itself and just how you frame problems. And using this model of complicated versus complex, this whole misinfo, disinfo sounds very complex. Like if I changed the whole education system tomorrow, I got all the provinces and territories on board, that doesn't solve my problem. I made a change. I have to see what the outcome of that change is. And that could manifest over months, years. And meanwhile, that's going on. There's all the politics going on and all these other things happening. So you can't just say, like, if I would have changed that one thing at this time, we would have all been better at the end. It's like a slow progression. It's a long, drawn out war against this type of stuff. And I guess it's the Western mind, like, right? We have very short memory. Whereas a lot of the other places, they're playing the long ball and they're fine with that. So
just to comment quickly on that, you're absolutely right. I mean, going back to what I said earlier, I started observing at least Russia getting involved in this game in 2007 already. So the modern phase has been going on that long. We picked up, and I was writing about Russia's efforts to interfere in our democracy already in the 2015 federal election campaign. Mm-hmm. So Russia was clearly targeting Stephen Harper, Chris Alexander, Jason Kenney at the time. They were even setting up AstroTurf groups here in Canada to try and oust them and to support the Liberals during that campaign. So we were seeing it happen then. This is 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, we're doing a better job in this election, but it took us 10 years just to set up the basic monitoring infrastructure that we have today, whereas Russia, over the past 10 years, has developed all sorts of resources, technologies, and like I said, this vast network of influencers that are used to attack our democracy. So we've just been way too slow to even acknowledge the threat that this poses, and we've got so much road to sort of catch up to. The road to catching up to them is so long right now that we got to start thinking out of the box a little bit.
Do you think the problem is framed properly, though? Like when we talk about the elections, and good timing because we have one coming up, when we look at it, like we've never fully said that the outcome of an election has been changed because of someone meddling within there or generating favoritism for one of the people that's running. But we're willing to say, like, well, there was some influence going on. It almost sounds like we're always soft selling it, or are we waiting for we need like 10 smoking guns before we say it is what it is? Like, is this being framed properly? Are we?
No.
No. Okay.
No, absolutely not. You're absolutely right. We've tried to avoid, attributing any of this to foreign actors. And I don't understand why that is. Our allies, I mentioned Finland earlier, Estonia, others have clearly, pointed the finger when it's happening, and it's just transparency, right? Making sure that those people, their voters know who's doing this stuff, and it's become very helpful, and they've become much more resilient because of it. And we've just sort of failed to do that. I'll go to the final report of the Hogue Commission, which I think was tragic. It actually represented a setback for us in challenging foreign information operations. She clearly stated, which is a positive thing, that disinformation is an existential threat to our democracy. True. She acknowledged the threat of transnational repression. That's a good start. But when it came to Russia, I was utterly shocked by the conclusions that she came to. There are a couple of passages specifically. One where she said that while Russia has vast resources and capabilities to interfere in our democracy, she said that she didn't see any evidence of intent to do so.
You're like, have you not seen my work?
Well, not my work, but I mean, countless others. I mean, did you not watch what was happening? Going back to 2015, did you not witness what was happening to Chrystia Freeland in 2016, the attacks that she was under, or conservatives like James Bazan, others? There has been a constant barrage of information operations, influence operations, and transnational repression coming from Moscow and Russia's embassy targeting us. But for her to say that, to sort of dismiss it as something that's not really happening, is shocking. And like I said, this represents our failure to even acknowledge that it's happening, represents a significant setback in our efforts to try and combat it. And it's an own goal. We're shooting ourselves. She shot Canada in the foot, essentially, with that report.
You know what? And it just makes me wonder, and I'm not saying I have any evidence of anybody that's been bought and paid for by any of these regimes. It's just like if either they're too scared to say something definitively, or they're playing for the other side. Like I don't know what else there is in there. So yeah, some of it's kind of mind blowing. And again, going to law enforcement side, I see this all the time. We just don't call things the way they need to be called. That's also why there's all the podcasts out there now, and people are saying some good things and having these good discussions, because we can have this open conversation, get people thinking about it, and start looking into some stuff. I want to, just because we don't have too much time left, I want to make sure we talk about just some of the work that you're doing with DisinfoWatch. And can you explain for people that might not have seen your website or know of the work that you're doing, what is DisinfoWatch, and what can they go there and find?
So DisinfoWatch was set up back in 2020. I was approached by friends in Washington at the State Department, which at the time was doing very good work combating foreign information operations. And because COVID was clearly a rising threat, I had actually identified Russia in 2019 already as engaging in vaccine hesitancy, vaccine denial, not COVID related, but more broadly, as a way of trying to undermine trust in them and to sort of attack the cohesion of Western societies using that narrative. And so when COVID happened, I guess they noticed that work and offered to support the creation of a platform that would basically monitor for vaccine-related and COVID-related disinformation. So that's sort of where the work started. And it was a natural fit because I was already doing that work and writing about it in media anyway. And what it's grown into is basically a platform that regularly monitors our information space for information that is weaponized by foreign governments to attack us and our democracy. We don't really do any monitoring of the domestic information space. We do that too, but what we primarily focus on is what Iran, Russia, China are doing, the sorts of things that they're saying. And the key point is to try and contextualize all of this, because it's one thing to say that, Russia is saying this sort of a thing about Ukraine, but for Canadians to understand why that's important in terms of the Canadian policy, our own democracy, what that means, and in our own alliances. And so that's really been the goal. And so we have this website where we regularly post alerts, essentially, when we do detect these information operations. We just posted one this morning about China's Global Times basically vehemently denying that China has ever interfered in Canada's election or democracy, which is pure and utter nonsense, as we know now. Yeah. But you wouldn't expect anything else from the Chinese government or Global Times. And so when we post this stuff to social media, the key here is that we also share that information with our contacts in Canadian media to make sure that they're just aware of this stuff. And I think the real sign of success is when we don't see any of these narratives emerge in our domestic information space. That means that we're doing the work that we're supposed to be doing, and we're doing it well.
Okay.
It's basically suppression of foreign influence operations or information operations. And then we work with our a huge network of foreign partners to try and identify some of the influencers as well here in Canada who collaborate with and amplify some of those foreign narratives. And that's really the key. And that's where I'm personally seeing the greatest threat right now is that network of influencers, whether it's China, Iran, or Russia, that they use. So they piggyback on these well-known influencers here in Canada, who then take those state-aligned narratives, basically launder out, whitewash the regime's fingerprints, and then inject them into our information space. That's the real threat. And trying to figure out how we address that is the big challenge right now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all the work you're doing. And I want to say thanks for your time on here. We'll have to do this again because I still got a million questions for you. You're blowing my mind. But you know what? I want to say I really do appreciate it. And I recommend people check out your work. If you can hang online for just a minute and we'll say bye offline. But yeah, thank you for being on here today.
Thanks, Nathan. And thanks that you're all the work you're doing to draw attention to this issue.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.